So the disciples are back. They're excited and they're waving their hands in the air. They can't believe what it is that they've been a part of. But have you ever spent time with kids who are at the end of a long day of playing? You know that this kind of frantic energy usually precedes a crash. In fact, they know that they weren't the ones who did this, and they probably, if they weren't the ones who had done it, would probably not believe it with their own eyes. There's children who've been born lame, who are all of a sudden running and playing and dancing, and there are women who've never felt the warmth of another human hand in decades, cured of their leprosy. Men who had lost their sight are back at work, dignity restored. The forces of darkness are in retreat. The kingdom of God is nearer than it's ever been before. But something feels off as they return. They thought this was going to be a roller coaster that only ever goes up. Maybe they thought it would get easier. Maybe they thought that somehow, some way, somebody would stop talking about them behind their back. Maybe they thought it would get easier to be so despised and reviled wherever they went. After all, they were doing these great things, but still they heard those nagging voices. Ah, here come the Christians again. Those Jesus followers are here again. They breeze into town preaching about the kingdom of God and a coming time of judgment. And they don't even bother to bring with them a tunic or a cloak. They bring no food with them. They expect us to foot the bill for this ministry. Good for nothing. The tones, the stares, the gossip, all of this was fine when Jesus first sent them out, but little by little, every word spoken negatively about them, every stare, every gaze not quite met on the street, every time somebody crossed the street just so they didn't have to have another conversation with one of these Christ followers, every time chipped another little piece off the armor, another chink in the shield. And so one by one, these 12 men, so excited at first, begin to walk away from the field. They begin to walk away from the harvest that they were called to. They leave the front lines and come back to Jesus, licking their wounds. And whether they're here hoping to recapture the spark that they once had, or whether they've just given it up altogether, one by one they come to Jesus exhausted, burnt out, worn down, and restless. So Jesus does something remarkable. He leads them not to where you and I might go for rest. There's no peaceful garden. There's no quiet stream. There's no blissful solitude. He leads them into the wilderness. To the same place maybe that Jesus himself went not that long ago to be tested and tried by the devil. There's nothing about even the word wilderness that suggests that it's a place you go to get your groove back. It's cold at night. It's hot during the day. There's no shade. There's nothing to break the wind's path. And so dust and rocks and debris blows in every single direction. The only animals that choose to live in this wilderness are scorpions, spiders, and vultures. This is where Jesus brings them. Like them, our first question would probably be, why? Has Jesus brought us here to die? Is this going to be some kind of a ritualistic murder-suicide? Is this going to be a mass grave? Why would anyone willingly come to this place of wilderness, to the ends of the earth, when all I really need is a hot bath and a shoulder rub? But as if that were not enough, one by one, boats begin appearing on the horizon. Standing on a flat, open plain with a lake just to the north, they see gradually tiny shapes. They're looking an awful lot like people gathering and pouring out of these boats and walking up the hill, walking up the path to where they are. Dozens, hundreds, thousands of people, real people, coming into following Jesus' footsteps into the wilderness to where Jesus was. I wonder if anyone that day paused for a minute to think about miracles. In my Bible, and I think in all of the Bibles that we have in this church, this chapter is broken down into this passage is broken down into two distinct pericopes, two paragraphs. One, in my Bible, says, Jesus walks on water, and the one before it says, Jesus feeds 5,000. Both of those statements seem miraculous. But I wonder if anyone that day thought for a moment that they would be witness to not just one, not just two, but 3 miracles. Because it's the subtler miracle, this first miracle, that really sets the stage. It may not make headlines or be glamorous or flashy, but as C.S. Lewis says, miracles are a retelling of in small letters of the very same story written across the whole world in letters too large for some of us to see. Miracles are the invasion of reality by the supernatural. It is God pointing at the impossible things in the world and claiming, mine. 12 men, 12 broken, dirty, exhausted men go into the wilderness with Jesus feeling like failures. And not one, not two, but 5,000 miracles show up to prove them wrong. Wrong in everything that they thought that they knew about. Wrong in their expectations of what God was going to do through them. Wrong in their expectations of how they had to handle it. Wrong in their approach to their own limitations and their failures. Wrong, wrong, wrong. This is a story for people who have ever felt burnt out. It's a story for people who've said, my tank is empty, I've got nothing else to give. And it's a story where God steps into that reality and says, and that is where I shine. Do not miss how remarkable this story really is. With polish, and with best practices, and with the right circumstances, anyone can draw a crowd. But for regular, for unremarkable, for plain, for broken, dirty people, it takes nothing shy of the miraculous, and that is what shows up. God is showing us today that in this story, he was in a miracle-working kind of mood. And so 5,000 men show up, we're told. Mark doesn't count the women or the children who might have been in the crowd. Because the point isn't actually the number of people who come, but just that it is a phenomenal number. Let me give you some context. The population of Grenfell in 2006 was 996. In terms of just men, that is more than 5 times the town of Grenfell showing up all at once in one remote place in a remote and dusty part of the world. There are no comfortable seats. There is no bleacher seating. This is, for lack of a better understanding, this is the desert. 5 Grenfells showing up at once. 100 times the number of people gathered here at this church. And that's not counting women and children. Most commentaries think that the number is probably closer to 20 or 30,000. The disciples do a quick head count, and some basic math tells them that feeding this many people is not going to come cheap. They estimate that it's going to take nearly a full year's wages to make it happen. But this is not the disciples showing a lack of faith. This is them trying to trust God. Hear it in their words. They want to see how they can make this happen. That even if it means going into, say, a year's debt, they want to be committed to doing the work of God. After all, didn't Jesus say, if someone asks for your coat, give him your shirt as well? They're exhausted and broken and at the end of the rope, and these 12 men still want to push a little bit more. But their tanks are empty. The question behind their question is not, should I go and tell these people to get to where to go to? The question is not, where should they go to find the food? It's, really, Lord? Is this really what you're asking me to do right now? Because if it is, I'll do it. But I got to be honest with you, there may be some resentment behind it. Jesus' answer is designed to be surprising, not just for them, but also for us. His response is both yes and no. Go and do more. But also let me do it for you. It's simply take what you have, give it to me, and then let me give it away. This is a bold call from Jesus. Give it to me and let me give it away. A few loaves and some fish give Jesus a deeper understanding into the math of God. They've come to this place because God values rest. Rest and from the creation of the world has been a good thing. It has been a necessary thing. It has been a commanded thing. But it's not something that we're likely to claim. We tell ourselves that it's far better to be busy than to rest. To tell ourselves that God has given us skills and abilities that are going to be wasted if we don't use them right now. And so even if we make time for God on Sunday morning for an hour or two, we're always thinking about the laundry list of responsibilities waiting for us as soon as we get home. The house is a mess. The work needs doing. And all of it a failure to rest. In so many ways, we find ourselves standing in the shoes of the disciples. We find ourselves in their place, coming here this morning looking for rest, but finding the needs of the world weighing on us even here. Jesus said, though, Sabbath was made for man and not the other way around. When Jesus brings us to the wilderness to rest, he intends for that to be the case. When Jesus invites us to come to church to rest and to cease from our work, he intends for us to do that. The needs of the world will always be there. And that's a certain reality, as it is that the floor beneath me is going to hold my weight. That if I step down from this stage, that I will fall. These are guaranteed realities. The needs of the world will always exceed the ability that we have to meet them. But Jesus is calling us to answer the question in front of a banquet table filled with people too numerous to count. The real question that Jesus wants us to answer is, who do you serve? Because there's two ways that Christians answer this question. Either I serve God on behalf of the world, or I serve the world on behalf of God. How you answer this question will define the way that you understand work, and the way that you understand grace, and the way that you understand rest. If you are serving the world on behalf of God, the world's needs will always come first. You will never be free to say no. You will never be truly free to rest. You will never be able to take the Sabbath seriously and exercise the grace that God has given you by giving you a chance and a command to rest. But if you serve God on behalf of the world, then the work that you do serves a greater purpose. It's not about simply meeting a checklist of demands, but it's about hearing the voice of God, living and breathing daily within you, calling you to serve Him, His glory, and His kingdom. The feeding of the 5,000 is an invitation by the Lord Himself to find our rest in Him. that you and I have been set free from the burden of law and its requirement, and been able to be set free to truly rest. And so the disciples dine with the multitudes. They find out what he means when he says that he's offering them living bread. When we allow Jesus to do our work in our place, we find ourselves not only refreshed, but multiplied. We find ourselves broken and distributed and more than enough to meet the needs of the world. This is miracle too. But Jesus wants to see if we really understand what this means for our day-to-day lives. He wants to understand if we truly grasp the significance of this, or if we're just seeing it as a Sunday morning kind of thing. So he gets them on a boat, and he sends them off separately. I wonder if any of the disciples stopped for a minute to ask how Jesus was going to get to the other side. If anyone stopped to think about, wait, we all came here in one boat, and Jesus is sending us off, how is he going to get to where we're going? Jesus maybe is sending them off alone. Maybe he's done. Maybe he's burnt out. Maybe a million different things. But never did any of the disciples expect that when they looked out of the side of the boat that they would see what they saw. A figure looking like a ghost walking upon the waves. And when the figure turns toward them and they can see clearly his face, see clearly who this is, they see Jesus doing something impossible, as though it were nothing at all. And this is miracle 3. Mark tells us that they were terrified. But more interestingly, he tells us that they were terrified because they didn't understand the loaves. These two stories are connected. There is a principle in the feeding of the 5,000 that Jesus wants to make sure the disciples understand. Something that will define them for the rest of their lives. So it's something timeless and true today as it has ever been. That when we gather as a Sabbath people, when we gather on a Sunday, we're reenacting the story of the feeding of the 5,000. We're being brought into the presence of God's rest to be restored, and we're being multiplied to go out and feed the world. Not with literal bread, but with life and grace and mercy. We're being brought in and we're being multiplied to go back out. C.S. Lewis earlier told us that miracles are about a story being told and retold. The feeding of the 5,000 tells us every single story we've ever needed to hear. It's a story of a father providing for his children in a garden. It's a story of slaves being set free from the chains of work. It's a story of men, women, and children working their way west. It's a story of slaves, of light conquering darkness, of shepherds bringing down giants, of bread from heaven in the middle of the desert, of water from a stone, of dry bones coming to life, and of a judgment day and a wedding feast. Little by little, we find ourselves invited deeper through the miracle of 5,000 people eating bread. We find ourselves digging deeper into the story of God. Not stories, but the story singular, perfect and complete. We are every character in it and none at the same time. The lesson of the loaves calls out to us today. God wants to be your sustenance, your sustainer, your beginning and your end. So often as Christians, we invite God to be our Redeemer. We want a God who saves us. And we want that to be where the story stops. We like an empty cross. We're moved by an empty tomb. But the message and the lesson of the loaves goes so much deeper. 40 years after the fact, Mark still remembers that the two stories are connected. 40 years, for a full generation after the fact, Mark takes a moment to reflect on what the feeding of 5,000 means for us in day-to-day living. Because the truth is, it's easy to forget the point. We tell this story in our Sunday schools and to our children. It's easy to illustrate in kids' Bibles. But this is not a story for children. It's a story written for men and women who are exhausted from doing good work that Jesus has set them to. It's a story about trusting Jesus to sustain everything in all of creation. But how often we refuse to give him the space to sustain us. And as we fill our calendars and our schedules with a million little things that we have to do, we have the audacity to claim that we're too busy to take out time for God. Because the great irony of the story is that it should be the exact opposite. If you're tired, when you're worn out, when you feel like you're burnt out and your tank is empty, recognize the truth that the needs of the world are infinite. You'll never be complete. You'll never be completely at rest as long as that is your goal. And so instead, we gather on Sundays to follow Jesus into the wilderness. To go to a place where we're tested and we're tried by the devil, where the hard things of life live, where the realities of life are ugly and messy. And we gather in a place of miracles to have a small lunch. And trust that that small lunch is all we need in the hands of the Sustainer. Amen.